Shut your mouth, boy. Officer Rebecca Morrison's racist slur cuts through Channel 7's live studio like a blade as she glares down at a distinguished black man in an expensive suit. Her face twists with pure hatred, while 2.3 million viewers witness the shocking confrontation. Judge Theodore Washington maintains his composure despite the venomous attack. Morrison's eyes burn with fury as she steps closer, her hand rising with predatory intent. Without warning, she slaps him hard across the face. The violent blow snaps his head sideways as her handprint flares red against his dark skin. Washington staggers but remains standing, his dignity intact despite the brutal assault. Morrison grins wickedly at the cameras, chest puffed with malicious satisfaction. Have you ever seen pure racism obliterate someone's career in seconds on live TV? The morning sun streams through the towering glass windows of Channel 7's state-of-the-art broadcast facility in downtown Manhattan. Inside Studio A, the polished chrome and glass set of Justice Today gleams under professional lighting that could illuminate a small theater. Host Margaret Collins adjusts her navy blazer as makeup artists apply final touches. Her earpiece crackles with producer updates about today's explosive topic: police reform in America. The show's graphics team has prepared slides showcasing rising tensions between law enforcement and communities across the nation. 30 seconds to live broadcast, announces floor director Sarah Kim, her clipboard thick with guest notes and security protocols. The studio audience of 50 settles into their red velvet seats, many wearing police department pins or community activist badges. Officer Rebecca Morrison smooths her crisp blue uniform and checks her reflection in the monitor. At 36, she radiates the confidence of someone who believes her badge grants unlimited authority. Her blonde hair is pulled into a severe bun that matches her rigid posture. Morrison has spent weeks preparing for this moment. As Metro Police Department's newly appointed community relations specialist, this national television appearance represents her golden ticket to political stardom. She envisions herself as the voice of law enforcement, the officer who speaks truth to liberal media bias. Her talking points are memorized: maintain order, respect authority, follow protocols. She has practiced her most authoritative expressions in the mirror, perfecting the stern look that says, "Don't mess with me." What Morrison doesn't know is that seated quietly in the green room, reviewing case files with the focused intensity of a scholar, is Judge Theodore Washington. At 48, he carries himself with the understated dignity of someone who has earned respect through decades of principled service. Washington's charcoal suit is expensive but understated. His silver hair is neatly trimmed, and his dark eyes reflect the wisdom of someone who has presided over thousands of cases. In his leather briefcase lies a confidential report that could reshape American policing forever. As chairman of the National Police Oversight Commission, Washington controls the distribution of $2.8 billion in federal police funding. His signature can approve or deny grants that determine whether departments can afford new equipment, training programs, or even basic operations. Today's briefcase contains Morrison's department's funding application, $12 million hanging in the balance. The preliminary review is damning. Pattern of discriminatory behavior requiring immediate federal intervention. Washington sips his coffee and reviews testimony from community members who have filed complaints against Morrison's department. The pattern is unmistakable: excessive force, racial profiling, and a culture that views minorities as inherent threats. Technical difficulties plague the morning broadcast. Washington was scheduled to appear via satellite from his chambers, but equipment failures have forced him to join the panel in person. The show's research team scrambles to update graphics and seating arrangements. Producer David Carter rushes between the green room and control booth, his stress levels rising as airtime approaches. "Where's the nameplate for Judge Washington?" he shouts into his headset. "And someone needs to brief Rebecca about the last-minute panel change." But Morrison is already in makeup, earpiece removed, focused on her own preparation. She has no idea that the federal judge who will determine her department's fate is about to sit beside her on live television. The studio audience includes police families who have driven hours to support Morrison. They wear blue ribbons and carry signs reading "Back the Blue" and "Support our officers." Their presence feeds Morrison's confidence that America will embrace her message. In the front row, community activist Maria Santos clutches a photo of her son, a victim of police brutality. She hopes today's discussion will finally bring accountability to departments like Morrison's. The irony is thick as syrup. Morrison and Santos share the same space, unaware their lives will soon collide in the most public way imaginable. Washington checks his watch and closes his briefcase. The funding report inside contains Morrison's professional death warrant, though she remains blissfully unaware. He believes in due process, in allowing the system to work methodically and fairly. 5 minutes to air, Carter announces, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The studio lights burn brighter, cameras adjust their focus, and makeup artists make final adjustments. Morrison takes her position at the panel table, her nameplate reading Officer R. Morrison, Community Relations. She practices her opening smile, the expression of someone who believes she represents the moral authority of law enforcement. In 60 seconds, 2.3 million Americans will witness the collision between ignorance and justice, between prejudice and power, between a racist cop and the federal judge who can end her career with a single decision. The countdown begins, and neither Morrison nor Washington knows their lives are about to change forever. The red on-air sign blazes to life as Margaret Collins flashes her professional smile into camera one. Good morning, America. I'm Margaret Collins, and this is Justice Today, broadcasting live to our 2.3 million viewers nationwide. The studio lights intensify, casting sharp shadows across the polished panel table. Collins adjusts her notes, unaware that she's about to witness the most explosive television moment of her career. Today, we're tackling one of the most divisive issues facing our nation, police reform and community relations. Can law enforcement and citizens find common ground? She gestures toward the panel with practiced precision. Joining me today is Officer Rebecca Morrison from the Metro Police Department's Community Relations Division. Morrison straightens in her chair, her badge catching the studio lights like a beacon of authority. Her smile radiates confidence as she nods to the cameras. We also have defense attorney Sarah Kim, who specializes in civil rights cases. Kim waves politely, her expression serious as she reviews her legal briefs. And we're expecting to be joined via satellite by Federal Judge Theodore Washington, chairman of the National Police Oversight Commission. Collins pauses, touching her earpiece as static crackles through the connection. In the control booth, producer David Carter frantically signals the technical crew. The satellite feed flickers with snow and digital artifacts, making Washington's remote appearance impossible. We're losing the connection, Carter mutters into his headset. Collins maintains her composure despite the chaos in her earpiece. I'm sorry, folks. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with Judge Washington's connection. We'll try to resolve that during our first commercial break. Morrison seizes the opening like a predator sensing weakness. Margaret, if I may, this gives us a perfect opportunity to discuss the real challenges law enforcement faces every single day. Her voice carries the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. We deal with individuals who believe rules don't apply to them, Morrison continues, her blue eyes hardening. People who think they can intimidate their way through life, demanding special treatment because of their so-called status. The studio audience murmurs approval, particularly the police families in the front rows. Their nodding heads and supportive expressions fuel Morrison's growing confidence. These entitled individuals, Morrison's voice grows stronger, walk into our courthouses, our police stations, even our television studios, expecting to be treated like royalty. They believe their attitude alone will open doors that should remain closed to people who refuse to follow proper procedures. Defense attorney Kim shifts uncomfortably in her seat. Officer Morrison, don't you think we should focus on building bridges rather than creating divisions? Morrison's laugh cuts through the studio air like shattered glass. Attorney Kim, with respect, you work in boardrooms and law offices. I work on the streets where entitled behavior creates real danger for real people. During the commercial break, Judge Washington enters the studio through the side entrance, his movements quiet and deliberate. He wears an understated charcoal suit that speaks of quality without ostentation. His briefcase contains the funding report that could devastate Morrison's department. Washington approaches the panel table during the 60-second break, noting his nameplate reading Judge T. Washington, Federal Oversight Commission. The printing is small, professional, and easily overlooked by someone not paying attention. Morrison glances up from her notes and immediately fixates on the distinguished black man approaching the panel. Her expression shifts subtly, jaw tightening as she processes what she considers an intrusion into professional space. "Excuse me," Morrison says loudly enough for the studio microphones to pick up her voice. "Audience members need to remain in the gallery seating during broadcast." Washington pauses, surprised by the challenge. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Judge Washington, your scheduled panelist." Morrison's laugh carries a sharp edge that cuts through the studio air. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." Her sarcasm draws uncomfortable chuckles from some audience members who don't recognize Washington. "Sir, I don't know what fantasy you're living in," Morrison continues, her voice dripping with condescension. "But this panel is reserved for actual professionals, not people pretending to be something they're not." The floor director signals 30 seconds to air, but Morrison stands from her chair, positioning herself between Washington and his designated seat. Her uniform seems to expand with authority as she blocks his path. "This is exactly what I was just discussing," Morrison declares, turning toward the cameras as if Washington is a convenient prop for her argument. Entitled individuals who believe they can simply walk into professional spaces and demand accommodation. Washington maintains his dignity, speaking in measured tones. "Officer Morrison, perhaps we could clarify this situation with the producer. I'm certain there's simply been a communication error." "Communication error." Morrison's voice rises with indignation. "The only error here is someone thinking they can walk into a live television broadcast and demand a seat at the table without proper authorization." The red light flashes, signaling return from commercial break. Collins struggles to regain control as cameras roll live across America. "Welcome back to Justice Today," Collins announces, her professional training overriding the chaos unfolding beside her. "We're continuing our discussion on police-community relations." Morrison turns toward the cameras, her chest puffed with righteous authority. "Margaret, I apologize to your viewers, but we have a perfect example of the challenges law enforcement faces happening right here in your studio." 2.3 million viewers watch as Morrison gestures dismissively toward Washington. "This gentleman seems to believe that if he acts entitled enough, professional standards will simply bend to accommodate him." "Officer Morrison," Collins interrupts, checking her notes frantically, "I believe there may be some confusion about our panel composition." "Margaret, with all due respect," Morrison's tone suggests Collins is naive about real-world threats. "I handle security matters. This individual is clearly attempting to disrupt our broadcast through intimidation tactics." Washington attempts to show his federal judicial credentials, retrieving them from his jacket pocket with calm precision. "Officer Morrison, if you would simply examine my identification—" "I don't need to see any fake documents," Morrison snaps, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Anyone can print official-looking paperwork these days. I've seen every scam in the book." The studio audience shifts uncomfortably as tension fills the air like smoke. Some recognize Washington from news coverage, but Morrison's aggressive control of the situation creates hesitation about intervening. "This is what we're up against every single day," Morrison continues, playing to the cameras like a seasoned politician. "Individuals who refuse to accept that authority exists for everyone's protection, not just their convenience." Washington extends his credentials once more, his patience reflecting years of judicial temperament. "Officer, these documents clearly identify me as Federal Circuit Judge Theodore Washington." Morrison's face contorts with disgust as she stares at the offered identification. "Sir, I don't care what your fake ID claims. Professional credentials aren't handed out like candy to anyone who demands them." The cameras capture every nuance of Morrison's expression. The contempt in her eyes, the sneer playing at her lips, the way her hand hovers near her belt as if Washington poses a physical threat. "This is exactly what's wrong with our society," Morrison declares to the live audience, her voice reaching crescendo. "People who think they can intimidate law enforcement into backing down, who believe their entitled attitude trumps established procedure." Washington remained standing beside the panel table, his dignity intact despite the public humiliation. His voice stays level, though steel creeps into his tone. Officer Morrison, I strongly encourage you to reconsider your current approach. Are you threatening a police officer on live television? Morrison's voice rises to a near shout, her performance reaching fever pitch. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing exactly why we need strong law enforcement officers who won't be bullied by people who think they're above the rules. Morrison then reaches out and slaps the credentials from Washington's hands with deliberate force. The federal documents scatter across the studio floor like fallen leaves, clearly visible to viewers at home. The camera inadvertently captures papers reading Federal Circuit Judge and National Police Oversight Commission, but Morrison never looks down. That's what I think of your fake paperwork, Morrison declares triumphantly, her smile beaming into the cameras as 2.3 million Americans watch in stunned silence. The scattered federal credentials lie across the polished studio floor like pieces of Morrison's shattered future, though she remains blissfully unaware. Judge Washington's official identification gleams under the bright studio lights, clearly displaying Federal Circuit Judge and National Police Oversight Commission to 2.3 million horrified viewers. Morrison stands over the scattered papers with triumphant satisfaction, her chest puffed with pride as she addresses the live cameras. That's exactly how we handle people who try to intimidate law enforcement with fake credentials and entitled attitudes. Her blue eyes sparkle with malicious glee as she turns back toward Washington. Sir, you can pick up your little props after the show. Right now, you need to return to the audience seating where you belong. Washington looks down at his scattered credentials, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Years of judicial temperament keep his voice measured despite the public humiliation. Officer Morrison, those documents represent the authority of the federal government. Federal government? Morrison's laugh cuts through the studio like broken glass. Right, and I suppose you're going to tell me you're personally friends with the president, too. She rolls her eyes dramatically for the cameras, playing to what she assumes is a supportive audience. Social media explodes as viewers recognize Washington from news coverage. Twitter erupts with hashtags, #JusticeToday, #PoliceAbuse, #WashingtonAssault. The show's ratings spike as word spreads about the unfolding disaster, but Morrison remains oblivious to the digital firestorm. Producer David Carter frantically paces the control booth, his face pale with horror as he watches his career implode alongside Morrison's. Cut to commercial, he shouts at his technical crew. Cut to commercial now! But the live broadcast continues relentlessly, capturing every moment of Morrison's professional suicide for posterity. The control room buzzes with panicked voices as staff members realize they're witnessing television history in the making. Margaret, Morrison addresses the host while keeping her eyes fixed on Washington. This is exactly the kind of disruptive behavior that undermines respect for legitimate authority. These people think if they cause enough of a scene, we'll just give in to their demands. Collins touches her earpiece frantically, receiving urgent messages from the control booth. Producer Carter's voice crackles through her receiver. That's really Judge Washington. Stop her! But Morrison's aggressive control makes intervention nearly impossible on live television. The studio cameras capture every angle of the confrontation, their high-definition lenses recording evidence that will soon be analyzed frame by federal investigators. The professional lighting creates dramatic shadows that emphasize the racial dynamics playing out before millions of witnesses. Defense attorney Sarah Kim tries to intervene, her voice strained with growing alarm. Rebecca, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. Perhaps we should verify everyone's credentials before continuing. Morrison whips around to face Kim, her expression darkening with authority. Sarah, with respect, I don't need civilians telling me how to handle security situations. This individual is clearly attempting to disrupt our broadcast through intimidation tactics. But Rebecca, Kim pressed, her voice urgent with concern. What if he really is a federal judge? What if we're making a terrible mistake here? What if he really is what? Morrison interrupts, her voice rising with indignation. Some kind of federal judge who just happens to show up without proper introduction? These scam artists always have elaborate stories to explain their criminal behavior. The studio audience shifts uncomfortably in their seats, the tension so thick it feels like breathing syrup. Several members recognize Washington from courthouse visits and news coverage, but Morrison's authoritative presence creates a chilling effect that silences potential witnesses. Morrison's supporters in the police families section begin to look uncertain as they process Washington's dignified demeanor and expensive suit. Something doesn't add up, but Morrison's confidence keeps them from speaking out against her authority. Community activist Maria Santos recognizes Washington immediately, her hands trembling as she clutches her son's photograph. She wants to speak up but fears Morrison's retaliation against her family. The silence becomes complicit as potential allies remain frozen by intimidation. Morrison turns back to Washington, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, I've been patient with your little performance, but now you're disrupting a live television broadcast watched by millions of Americans. That constitutes interference with media operations." Washington bends slowly to retrieve one of his scattered credentials, his movements deliberate and dignified. "Officer Morrison, if you would simply examine this federal judicial identification, we could resolve this situation immediately." "I told you, I don't need to see your fake paperwork," Morrison snarls, stepping closer to invade Washington's personal space. "What I need is for you to follow simple instructions and return to your proper place in the audience." The cameras capture Morrison's aggressive posture as she towers over Washington, her badge and uniform creating an imposing silhouette under the studio lights. Her hand rests conspicuously on her duty belt, suggesting the threat of physical enforcement. Washington's calm demeanor only fuels Morrison's rage, as she interprets his dignity as disrespect for her authority. "This attitude right here is the problem," she announces to the live audience. "This belief that certain people don't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. This is what every police officer faces daily," Morrison continues, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience. "Individuals who believe they can use intimidation and fake authority to get their way." The studio's professional microphones pick up every nuance of Morrison's voice, from the contempt dripping from her words to the slight tremor of excitement as she believes she's making television history. Her performance feeds on the live audience and national attention. Washington straightens to his full height, still holding his recovered credential. His voice carries quiet steel as decades of judicial authority surface beneath his measured tone. "Officer Morrison, you are making a grave error that will have serious consequences." Morrison's eyes flash with fury at what she perceives as a direct threat. "Are you threatening a police officer on live television? Because that's exactly the kind of criminal behavior I'm talking about." She addresses the cameras directly, her performance reaching new heights of indignation. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing a perfect example of why strong law enforcement is essential. This individual is now openly threatening me for simply doing my job." The studio's professional lighting creates harsh shadows across Morrison's face as her expression hardens with righteous anger. Her voice rises to address the entire studio audience and millions of viewers beyond. "This entitled behavior is exactly what's destroying respect for legitimate authority in America," Morrison declares, her words carrying the fervor of someone who believes she's fighting a righteous battle. "People who think they can bully their way into professional spaces and demand special treatment." Collins makes another desperate attempt to intervene, her journalistic instincts screaming that something catastrophic is unfolding. "Officer Morrison, perhaps we should pause and verify everyone's identification." "Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but this is a law enforcement matter now." Morrison cuts her off with military precision. "This individual has escalated from simple disruption to threatening behavior. I won't be intimidated into backing down." Washington takes a measured step forward, his voice remaining calm despite the escalating hostility. "Officer Morrison, I am going to give you one final opportunity to examine my credentials and reconsider your actions." Morrison interprets Washington's step forward as aggressive behavior, her training kicking in as she assumes a defensive stance. "Sir, you need to back away immediately. Your threatening posture is creating a dangerous situation." Threatening posture. Washington's voice carries a note of incredulity as he maintains his dignified composure. "Officer, I am simply trying to show you official federal identification." "I don't care what you claim those papers say," Morrison's voice reaches a crescendo of authority. What I see is someone who refuses to follow lawful orders and is now advancing in a threatening manner toward a uniformed police officer. The tension in the studio becomes suffocating as Morrison's hand moves closer to her weapon. The audience holds its collective breath while 2.3 million viewers watch the confrontation spiral toward its inevitable climax. The control booth erupts in panic as producers realize they're broadcasting a potential felony assault live to the nation. Emergency protocols activate as staff members contact network executives and legal departments. Washington's patience finally shows signs of strain as he processes the magnitude of Morrison's ignorance and aggression. Officer Morrison, I am Federal Circuit Judge Theodore Washington, Chairman of the National Police Oversight Commission. You are committing multiple violations that will end your career. Morrison's face contorts with rage at what she perceives as the ultimate insult. Now you're impersonating a federal judge? That's a felony, sir. You've just escalated this from disruption to serious criminal behavior. She turns to the cameras with absolute conviction, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believes she's about to make law enforcement history. Ladies and gentlemen, this individual has now added impersonating a federal official to his list of crimes. This is exactly why we need officers who won't be intimidated. Washington takes one final step forward, extending his recovered credential toward Morrison with quiet dignity. Officer, please examine this identification before you destroy both our careers on live television. Morrison sees Washington's approach as the final act of aggression she's been building toward. Her face hardens with absolute resolve as she prepares to demonstrate her authority to 2.3 million viewers. That's it, Morrison declares with finality. You've refused lawful orders, threatened a police officer, impersonated a federal official, and now you're advancing in a threatening manner. Time to learn about consequences. Without warning, Morrison draws back her hand and slaps Washington hard across the face. The violent blow snaps his head to the side with such force that the sound echoes through the studio like a gunshot. The brutal assault sends shockwaves through the studio audience. Morrison's handprint glows red against Washington's dark cheek as she grins triumphantly at the cameras, savoring what she believes is her moment of ultimate victory. And that's how you deal with criminals who think they can intimidate law enforcement, Morrison announces to the stunned nation, completely unaware she just committed a felony assault on the most powerful man in American police oversight. The studio falls into deathly silence as Morrison's handprint glows red against Judge Washington's cheek. For 3 eternal seconds, 2.3 million viewers watch frozen in disbelief while Morrison basks in her perceived triumph, her smile beaming with malicious satisfaction. Washington holds his stinging cheek, his dignity intact despite the brutal public humiliation. His dark eyes meet Morrison's blue ones with the quiet steel of someone who has presided over thousands of cases and never lost control of his courtroom. Producer David Carter bursts through the studio doors like a man fleeing a burning building, his face white with terror as he clutches printouts and his buzzing cell phone. Sweat beads across his forehead as he realizes his show just broadcast a federal crime to the entire nation. Officer Morrison! Carter's voice cracks with panic as he rushes toward the panel table. Stop immediately. You need to stop right now. Morrison turns toward the interruption, annoyed that her moment of glory is being disrupted by what she perceives as typical media overreaction. David, I'm handling a criminal situation here. This individual has been threatening and disruptive. Chen's hands shake as he holds up his phone, displaying the federal judiciary website. Rebecca, this is Judge Theodore Washington. You just assaulted a federal judge on live television. Morrison's triumphant expression wavers for the first time, confusion creeping across her features like cracks in a dam. What are you talking about? This man is clearly some kind of activist or protester. No! Carter's voice rises to near hysteria as he shows Morrison the official judicial portrait on his screen. Look at this photo. Look at the nameplate. This is Federal Circuit Judge Theodore Washington. The camera captures Morrison's face in perfect high definition as her confident smile begins its historic collapse. She looks from Carter's phone to Washington's nameplate, then back to Washington himself, her brain struggling to process the impossible reality. Margaret Collins finds her voice, reading from frantically passed notes with the gravity of someone announcing a national disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, for viewers just joining us, we need to clarify that Judge Theodore Washington is indeed our scheduled guest and chairman of the Federal Police Oversight Commission. The show's graphics department, following emergency producer instructions, displays Washington's official biography on screen for all 3 million viewers. Judge Theodore Washington, Federal Circuit Judge, Chairman National Police Oversight Commission, authority over $2.8 billion in federal police funding. Morrison's mouth opens and closes silently like a fish gasping for air as the enormity of her mistake crashes over her in waves. The confident authority that defined her just moments ago evaporates like steam, leaving behind a woman staring into the abyss of her destroyed future. Federal judge? Morrison's voice comes out as barely a whisper, all her earlier bravado replaced by dawning horror. But how was I supposed to know? He didn't introduce himself properly. Washington slowly lowers his hand from his cheek, straightening to his full height as the power dynamic shifts with seismic force. When he speaks, his voice carries the unmistakable authority of someone who has sentenced countless criminals and now holds Morrison's fate in his hands. Officer Morrison! Washington's words fall like gavels in the silent studio. You have just committed felony assault on a federal judge, broadcast live to millions of witnesses. The cameras capture Morrison's complete transformation as her face cycles through confusion, recognition, and finally pure terror. Her legs seem unsteady as she grips the panel table for support, her world tilting off its axis. Washington bends down with deliberate precision, retrieving his scattered credentials from the studio floor. He holds up his Federal Commission identification, the same document Morrison had dismissed as fake just minutes earlier. This is the federal identification you refused to examine, Officer Morrison, Washington continues, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. The same identification that would have prevented this career-ending mistake. Morrison's voice cracks as desperation sets in. Judge Washington, Your Honor, I had no way of knowing. The technical difficulties, the lack of proper introduction, this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. Washington's eyebrows rise slightly as he processes Morrison's attempt at damage control. Officer, the cameras recorded you repeatedly refusing to examine my credentials. They captured you dismissing multiple attempts to verify my identity. The studio audience sits in stunned silence as they witness the complete reversal of power. Morrison, who commanded the space with authoritarian confidence just moments ago, now appears small and vulnerable as she faces the reality of assaulting a federal judge. Washington addresses the cameras directly, his judicial authority now unmistakable to every viewer. As chairman of the Police Oversight Commission, I was actually here today to discuss federal funding for local police departments, including Officer Morrison's own Metro Police Department. Morrison's face goes ashen as the final piece of the puzzle falls into place. Federal funding? You mean you control our department's budget? Officer Morrison, your department's $12 million grant application was under review, Washington continues with clinical precision. That application will now require emergency reconsideration in light of this incident. The weight of Morrison's actions crashes down like an avalanche. She didn't just assault any federal judge, she assaulted the man who literally controls her department's financial survival. Her racist arrogance has potentially bankrupted her entire police force. Collins, reading from emergency updates, delivers the final blow. Officer Morrison, your police chief is on line 1. He's watching the broadcast and requests you surrender your badge immediately. Morrison's legs give out as she collapses into her chair, the same seat where she held court with such confidence just minutes ago. Her triumphant smile has vanished forever, replaced by the hollow expression of someone watching their life implode in real time. Washington's voice cuts through the studio with judicial finality. Officer Morrison, you are now subject to immediate arrest for assault on a federal official, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority under color of law. The silence stretches like a held breath as 2.3 million Americans witness justice beginning to unfold on live television. Morrison sits frozen in her chair, her face drained of all color as the magnitude of her actions sinks in like poison through her veins. The same studio lights that highlighted her confident authority now expose her complete vulnerability to 2.3 million unforgiving witnesses. Judge Washington, Your Honor. Morrison's voice trembles as she attempts damage control, her earlier commanding tone replaced by desperate pleading. This was all a terrible mistake. I was just trying to maintain security protocols. I had no way of knowing who you were. The irony cuts through the studio air like a blade. Morrison's own recorded statements play back on social media in real time, showing her repeatedly refusing to examine Washington's credentials and dismissing him as a fake and criminal. Washington maintains his judicial composure, his hand still bearing the red mark of Morrison's assault. Officer Morrison, federal law enforcement takes a very serious view of attacks on federal judges. Your intentions are irrelevant when weighed against your actions. Margaret Collins receives frantic instructions through her earpiece, her face pale as she realizes her show has become evidence in a federal crime. Ladies and gentlemen, we're receiving word that FBI agents are currently en route to our studio. Morrison's eyes widen with pure terror as the reality hits her like a physical blow. FBI? But I'm a police officer. I was just doing my job. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding that we can work out internally. There is no internal resolution for assaulting a federal judge, Washington responds with the clinical precision of someone who has sentenced countless defendants. This matter now falls under federal jurisdiction, beyond the reach of local police politics. Producer David Carter approaches Morrison with obvious reluctance, his clipboard shaking in his hands. Rebecca, I have Police Chief Rodriguez on the line. He's been watching the broadcast and needs to speak with you immediately. Morrison's hand trembles as she takes the phone, her voice barely audible. Chief Rodriguez, sir, this is all just a huge misunderstanding. I can explain everything. The studio falls silent as viewers hear Chief Rodriguez's voice crackling through the phone speakers. Officer Morrison, you are hereby suspended without pay, effective immediately. Please surrender your badge and service weapon to studio security. The words hit Morrison like hammer blows, each syllable driving home the finality of her situation. Her career, her pension, her future. All destroyed in the span of 15 minutes on live television. Sir, please, Morrison begs into the phone, her professional composure completely shattered. I've served faithfully for 10 years. This was just one mistake. Can't we handle this quietly? Morrison, you assaulted a federal judge on live television. Rodriguez's voice carries through the studio with final authority. There is no handling this quietly. You've embarrassed our entire department and potentially cost us millions in federal funding. Collins watches in fascination and horror as television history unfolds before her cameras. Officer Morrison, you're being asked to surrender your badge and weapon on live television. Will you comply? Morrison's hands shake violently as she removes her police badge, the symbol of authority she wore with such pride just minutes ago. The metal feels cold and foreign in her trembling fingers as she places it on the panel table. Her service weapon follows, the holster empty for the first time in a decade. Studio security approaches cautiously, treating Morrison like the criminal she has become rather than the authority figure she once was. Washington observes the badge surrender with the detached interest of someone who has seen justice served countless times. Officer Morrison, I want you to understand that your actions today will be studied in law enforcement academies as an example of how not to conduct oneself. The FBI arrives with mechanical precision, their black suits and serious expressions creating a stark contrast to the bright television studio. Lead agent Sarah Martinez approaches Morrison with handcuffs that gleam under the studio lights. Rebecca Morrison, you are under arrest for assault on a federal judge under 18 U.S.C. Section 111, Martinez announces with professional clarity. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Morrison's legs buckle as the handcuffs click into place, the same restraints she once used to arrest others now binding her own wrists. The metallic sound echoes through the studio like the closing of a prison door. This can't be happening, Morrison whispers, as federal agents lead her away from the panel table where she held court just minutes ago. I'm a police officer. I serve the community. This has to be some kind of mistake. Washington's voice follows her as she's led away. "Officer Morrison, there is no mistake. Justice is simply following its proper course." The studio cameras capture Morrison's final moments of freedom as she's escorted through the same doors she entered with such confidence. Her career ends not with ceremony or retirement, but with federal arrest broadcast to millions of Americans who will never forget her spectacular fall from grace. Within minutes of Morrison's arrest, the video clip explodes across every social media platform like digital wildfire. The footage of a white police officer slapping a black federal judge on live television becomes the most shared content in internet history, accumulating millions of views before Morrison even reaches the federal courthouse. News networks interrupt regular programming to broadcast the unedited footage, showing Morrison's confident smile transforming into horror as she realizes Washington's identity. The contrast becomes iconic, a split-screen image of triumph and terror that captures the exact moment ignorance collides with consequence. CNN legal analyst Rebecca Torres provides breathless commentary over the looping footage. "We are witnessing the most clear-cut case of police misconduct ever recorded. Officer Morrison committed multiple federal crimes in front of 2.3 million witnesses with professional broadcast equipment capturing every angle." The hashtag #slap heard round the world trends globally within hours as millions share frame-by-frame analysis of Morrison's expression changing from smug satisfaction to abject terror. Memes proliferate showing the precise moment her smile vanishes, becoming a cultural symbol of comeuppance. Congressional leaders respond with unprecedented speed. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Robert Jackson calls an emergency session. "When police officers assault federal judges on live television, our entire constitutional system faces direct attack. This demands immediate federal intervention." Senator Maria Gonzalez announces comprehensive police reform legislation within 24 hours. The Morrison incident proves that local police departments cannot self-regulate. Federal oversight is no longer optional. It's essential for protecting our democracy. The Department of Justice moves with surgical precision, filing federal charges that could end Morrison's freedom for decades. Attorney General Patricia Williams personally announces the charges. 18 U.S.C. Section 111, assault on a federal judge carrying a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Additional charges pile up like an avalanche. Civil rights violations under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, obstruction of justice, and abuse of authority under color of law. Each charge represents years of potential prison time as federal prosecutors build an airtight case. Morrison's defense attorney, David Kim, faces an impossible task as he reviews the evidence. The entire assault was broadcast live in high definition from multiple angles. There's no ambiguity, no reasonable doubt. The footage speaks for itself. Legal experts across the nation analyze the case with academic fascination. Yale law professor Sarah Mitchell appears on every major network. Morrison's assault represents the most serious attack on judicial independence since the Civil War era. This requires maximum prosecution to preserve constitutional separation of powers. The trial becomes a media spectacle that dominates news cycles for months. Court TV provides gavel-to-gavel coverage as the Judge Slap trial draws audiences that rival the Super Bowl. Morrison's face becomes synonymous with police accountability across America. Jury selection proves challenging as potential jurors struggle to remain impartial after seeing the viral footage. The prosecution's case unfolds with devastating simplicity. They merely play the unedited television broadcast and rest their case. Morrison's defense attempts multiple strategies, each more desperate than the last. They claim ignorance of Washington's identity, but the footage shows her repeatedly refusing to examine his credentials. They argue she was following protocol, but police procedure experts testify that her actions violated every standard. Character witnesses emerge to reveal Morrison's pattern of discriminatory behavior. Community activist James Rodriguez testifies with quiet dignity. "Officer Morrison told me during a traffic stop that people like you needed to learn their place in society." Restaurant owner Lisa Carter describes Morrison's behavior during routine inspections. "She would make racist comments about our clientele and threaten to find violations if we didn't show proper respect for her authority." The prosecution presents social media evidence showing Morrison's history of racist posts and comments supporting police brutality. Her digital footprint reveals a pattern of bigotry that culminated in her assault on Judge Washington. Expert testimony demolishes any remaining defense arguments. Former police chief Michael Davis, now a consultant on police reform, testifies with devastating clarity. Officer Morrison's actions represent the complete opposite of professional law enforcement. She committed every violation possible in 15 minutes of television. Constitutional law experts explain the broader implications to the jury. Professor Janet Williams from Georgetown Law School testifies, Morrison's assault wasn't just an attack on Judge Washington personally. It was an assault on the federal judiciary and constitutional separation of powers. The prosecution's closing argument requires only 30 minutes as they replay key moments from the broadcast. Lead prosecutor Amanda Torres addresses the jury with measured precision. Ladies and gentlemen, Officer Morrison committed federal crimes in front of the entire nation. The evidence isn't disputed because it was broadcast live. Morrison's defense attorney makes a final desperate plea. My client made a terrible mistake born of ignorance, not malice. She deserves punishment, but not the destruction of her entire life. The jury deliberates for exactly 97 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all federal charges. Jury foreman Robert Martinez reads the verdict with solemn gravity. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Morrison collapses as the verdicts are read, the reality of decades in federal prison crushing her remaining hope. The same cameras that captured her assault now record her complete breakdown as justice unfolds with mechanical precision. Judge Patricia Sullivan presides over sentencing with the gravity appropriate for such a historic case. Officer Morrison, your assault on Judge Washington represents an attack on our constitutional system that demands severe consequences. Sullivan sentences Morrison to 18 years in federal prison, adding, this sentence must reflect that badge and uniform do not grant license to assault federal judges. Your actions threaten the independence of our judiciary and cannot be tolerated. The civil rights lawsuit filed by Judge Washington settles for $12 million, exactly the amount of federal funding Morrison's department lost due to her actions. The settlement creates a federal fund for judicial security improvements nationwide. Morrison's case triggers passage of the Federal Judicial Protection Act within 6 months, creating mandatory federal oversight of any local law enforcement agency whose officers assault federal judges. The legislation becomes known as the Morrison Law. Police departments across America implement emergency bias training programs, using Morrison's case as the ultimate cautionary tale. Her assault becomes required viewing in every police academy, studied as an example of how racism and ignorance can destroy careers and institutions. The Metro Police Department undergoes complete federal oversight, with Morrison's assault serving as evidence of systemic problems requiring comprehensive reform. Crime rates actually decrease under federal supervision as community trust increases. Morrison's spectacular downfall becomes a cultural touchstone, referenced in academic papers about implicit bias, abuse of authority, and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. Her name enters the dictionary of police misconduct alongside the most notorious cases in American history. The footage of her smile vanishing becomes an eternal reminder that in America, justice can still humble those who abuse their authority, even when they think the whole world is watching and cheering them on. 3 years after that fateful slap echoed through television history, Judge Theodore Washington stands before a packed auditorium at the FBI National Academy, addressing the newest class of federal law enforcement officers. The morning sunlight streams through tall windows, illuminating faces eager to learn from the man whose dignity under assault changed American policing forever. Officer Morrison's hand struck my face for less than a second. Washington begins, his voice carrying the measured authority that made him a respected jurist. But the impact of that moment continues to reverberate through every police station, courthouse, and academy in America. The auditorium falls silent as Washington touches his cheek, the same spot where Morrison's hatred left its mark. That slap wasn't just an assault on me personally. It was an attack on every principle our justice system represents. It revealed how quickly ignorance and prejudice can destroy both victim and perpetrator. Washington's words carry the weight of lived experience as he addresses future law enforcement leaders. Morrison thought her badge granted her immunity from consequence. She believed her uniform made her untouchable. In 15 minutes of live television, she learned that in America, no one, absolutely no one, stands above accountability. The federal reforms triggered by Morrison's assault have transformed American policing in ways once thought impossible. The Morrison Law requires federal oversight of any department whose officers assault federal officials, creating unprecedented accountability standards that protect both judges and citizens. Police academies nationwide now include mandatory viewing of Morrison's assault in their curriculum. The footage serves as a stark reminder that careers built over decades can be destroyed in moments of unchecked bigotry and arrogance. Morrison herself serves her 18-year federal sentence at FCI Danbury, where she has become a case study for other inmates about the consequences of abusing authority. Her former colleagues speak her name in whispered warnings about how quickly pride can become destruction. The Metro Police Department, under continued federal oversight, has become a national model for reform. Community trust has increased dramatically as officers embrace accountability rather than resistance. Crime rates have dropped, while civilian complaints have virtually disappeared. Chief Rodriguez, who survived the Morrison scandal through immediate accountability measures, now travels the country speaking about police reform. Morrison's assault was our lowest moment, but it forced us to confront systemic problems we had ignored for decades. The $12 million settlement from Morrison's civil rights case has funded judicial security improvements across America. Federal courthouses now feature enhanced protection protocols designed to prevent similar assaults on judicial independence. Washington uses his experience to advocate for continued reform, speaking at conferences and universities about the importance of dignity in the face of injustice. Morrison's greatest crime wasn't hitting me. It was believing her prejudice represented legitimate authority. The cultural impact extends far beyond law enforcement. Morrison's name has entered popular vocabulary as shorthand for spectacular career self-destruction through arrogance. Pulling a Morrison describes any situation where overconfidence leads to devastating consequences. Social media continues to circulate the footage, with new generations discovering the moment when racist authority met federal justice on live television. The video has become a digital monument to the power of accountability in democratic societies. Legal scholars study Morrison's case as a perfect storm of constitutional violations, using her assault to teach students about civil rights law, federal jurisdiction, and the importance of judicial independence. Her 15 minutes of infamy will educate lawyers for generations. Community activist Maria Santos, who witnessed the assault from the studio audience, now serves on civilian oversight boards created by federal mandate. Morrison's slap woke America up to what unchecked police power looks like. We can't let that lesson be forgotten. Washington's final words to the FBI Academy carry the weight of hard-won wisdom. Officer Morrison taught us that real authority earns respect through service, not fear through violence. True power protects the vulnerable rather than punishing the powerless. The judge pauses, looking out at the sea of future federal agents. Morrison's smile vanished the moment she learned who I was, but the smile of justice, that smile grows brighter every day as we build a more accountable system. If this story of justice triumphing over prejudice moved you, share it with everyone who believes accountability matters more than authority. Hit subscribe and the notification bell to join millions demanding that badges serve justice, not justify brutality. Comment below. How many other Morrisons are out there, one slap away from destroying their careers? What reforms would prevent this kind of assault on our constitutional system? Morrison thought her uniform made her untouchable. Washington proved that in America, justice still has the power to humble those who abuse their sacred trust. The question isn't whether there are more Morrisons in uniform. It's whether we'll demand accountability before they strike, or wait for the next slap to echo around the world. That slap lasted 1 second. Its lessons must last forever.
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.